University Medicine, and then the UNMC Pediatric Residency Program. In 2000, and 5 partners founded Village Point Pediatric in West Omaha. Dr. Mike met his wife Karen, a fellow pediatrician, when they were both students at Creighton University, and they have been married for 20 years. He is the proud father of 3 wonderful children: Lily, who is 18 and just returned from abroad studying in Israel, which was cut short by the coronavirus pandemic; Jack, age 15, a freshman in high school; and Eva, age 11, who will be graduating from Friedel Jewish Academy this year. These days, he says, his children sometimes are known as homestead minutes. They share every day about what I'm doing, both correctly and incorrectly as a parent. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Cohen.
All right, Lori, thanks very much. And I have a confession for everybody. This is my very first Zoom lecture. So I'm sure it's going to be blooper worthy by the end of it. And I'll look for the YouTube postings later on. So Lori, I want to thank you for creating this forum to have an open discussion about a time that's kind of crazy. I'm sure all of us can say we've never experienced anything like this. I have an uncle who lives in London, and he said the closest thing he's ever experienced was that during the Second World War, there were a lot of disruptions, and he would even sleep in the tube stations, the underground subway stations at night during the German bombings. And he said that was quite a disruption, but he thinks this is probably even, worse by comparison. And so we're all experiencing something that's really unique and certainly very challenging. I asked Lori to show a couple of different slides, and the first one I think she has up already, and that happens to be one of my favorite movies of all time. I'll tell you, in my office, probably the most popular movie right now is a movie called Contagion. I don't know if anybody has seen that. It seems to be very hot right now. But I know Groundhog Day is getting a lot of press and a lot of attention, and I think one that's more worthy. The movie came out in about 1993, and in 2006 it was included in the film registry, the United States National Film Registry. And I think for good reason. I think most religions have acknowledged this movie as the sort of the pinnacle of what a spiritual and philosophical movie can be. And I think, a lot of us feel right now that we are living in a kind of Groundhog Day, that, we have this challenge of every day being a little bit the same. And I think the challenge, especially that, I want to address, is what parents are really faced with. And that's, how do you take something that for kids can be very scary, very uncertain, very unpredictable? And let's not kid anybody, as adults, we're not that far removed from where we were as kids. It's scary for us too. And it may be scary and unpredictable in different ways, but it still is. And I think for everybody to, certainly lean into that and acknowledge it in some fashion is important. The question is, how do we deal with that ourselves, and how do we guide our kids through this process when they're feeling much the same way? And, probably the starting point in all this is to try to find, like all things in life, like all challenges in this life, how do you...
Hold on. Did I mute him?
You're good? All right, I'll keep going.
Sorry.
All right. How do you flip the script, like with all challenges in life, and how do you find the blessings in this? How do you find the blessings for yourself, for your family, for your kids? And so that's kind of what I want to discuss a little bit today. And then really probably the more important thing for me is, I'll try and keep an eye on the time, but really is to open it up to your guys' questions, because that's always the most interesting part, is finding out what's on your mind and how we can address that. So I want to play a little game with everybody, and it's called This Day in History. And with that said, Lori, we're ready for the next slide. All right, does anybody out there, you're gonna have to unmute so I can hear you. Does anybody out there know what this painting is?
No.
No, all right. Yeah, no. Yeah, I've got a hand in the back. So to this day in history, today is the birthday of Leonardo da Vinci. And he's actually listed, when you look it up, as April 15th, 1452, but that's on the Julian calendar. And when you convert that to the modern calendar, that happens to be today. And this is one of my favorite paintings because it was known to historians as being relatively insignificant. And they knew maybe it had something to do with Leonardo da Vinci, but they didn't think it was some sort of copy or some lesser imitation. And then the Prado Museum in Spain acquired it in 1819. And it sat there until 2012, being largely ignored. And then in 2012, they got the bright idea to do a restoration on it. And after they did the restoration, Lori, we're ready for the next slide. It turned into this. And behold, a masterpiece was found. And everybody got pretty excited because they realized, based on their perspective, there were a couple interesting things going on. This clearly was too close to the Mona Lisa to actually be some kind of just general imitation. And so once they did the sort of spectrometry on it and tried to figure out what was going on, they realized it was painted side by side next to the original Mona Lisa. And apparently some art historians suspect that when you put the two together, they actually create kind of a three-dimensional image when you let your eyes kind of lose their focus and the way they blend together. And the thing I love about this, not just that it's Leonardo da Vinci's birthday, but what these two paintings represent for what we all do as parents and some of the challenges we're facing right now is that, you know, originally when it was created, it was thought that if Leonardo didn't paint it directly, he painted it in collaboration with some of his students, probably in his studio. And so here, you know, as parents, we're all trying to create our own little masterpieces. You know, we're trying to create kids who are, you know, really, you know, amazing. And so we do that. We paint the best portrait we can, the best masterpiece we can. And then over time, you know, things sometimes change. Your masterpiece gets glossed over a little bit. And then the hope is that, you know, in time, things, you know, sort of reveal themselves once again on the other side. And, you know, and that's kind of a lot of the thinking that a lot of the parents I work with in the clinic, we're working with now because, you know, it's a kind of journey that, you know, you're on with your kids. And we know they're going to change over time, but you hope the fundamentals, the bones of who they are emotionally, you know, are going to continue to have that masterpiece underneath, you know, that we hope they're going to have. And just understanding that, you know, when we're working with our kids, even through challenging times like this, what we're looking for is not who they are now, but always as you dress them, you interact with them, you work with them on a daily basis, you understand who you're working with is the person they're going to be 10 and 20 and 30 years from now. All right, so that is a little bit of introduction. Lori, I'm ready for the next one. Okay, does anybody know who this guy is? All right, he has two significant this day in history. He was born on this day and he died on this day. So this is both the anniversary of his birth and his death. The black and white etching you see on your right-hand side is the only known accurate image of Shakespeare. Everything else you see is uncertain or ambiguous as far as its origin. The only known portrait we have of Shakespeare is this etching that was on the front of his folios. And the thing that always fascinates me about Shakespeare is that, you know, here he is. He's a guy who, you know, wrote 39 plays and 154 sonnets. It's been translated to different languages. And are you ready for this? Klingon, the Star Trek language of Klingon, has several William Shakespeare plays. But in his own lifetime, really not truly known by scholars, it's debated at least, how much he was really, you know, celebrated in his own life, you know, and here he is, probably the greatest playwright. And again, I think a humbling but really important reminder for all of us as parents in general, and especially in this kind of unique time, is that we don't know what the effects of are going to be down the road. And that can work both, focusing on the positive. Sometimes you invest so much in your kids and, so much that you hope for them and want them to be. And the reality is you just got to always have faith that if you have a vision in mind of what you're doing and how you're parenting, that's a really important thing. And that don't be dissuaded if you're not seeing the results of that right away, because sometimes it takes a long time for your hard effort to be celebrated and to really kind of come to fruition. And so patience, just being patient in your parenting style, your parenting technique, and let's not kid anybody, the courage sometimes that it takes every day as a parent to, feel like you're doing the right thing and that you got the right plan, that you just keep your eye on the horizon line. You just keep reminding yourself during this whole time. Doing with any child is you're planting a garden. And sometimes it takes a long time before you know what kind of garden you're growing, but just have faith that the one you're planting is going to really be really fruitful. We all strive to create kids who are kind and just and compassionate and thoughtful. It's what I call the Kuhn Alam kids who are really motivated. Their inner punch card are ones that they want to change the world. And I think, the thing that I hear most from families in my office, especially if I know well, and one of the things I always like to do as a pediatrician is allow my families plenty of time so that the parents can talk to me about what's on their mind. It's important for me to be able to focus on kids. It's important for me to be able to solve whatever medical issues they have. But even more importantly, I think for so many families are the emotional challenges that they have and the emotional questions they have. Because let's not kid anybody, we're all human. We're all, going through this journey together, and we all have sometimes the same challenges, and how we address and deal with those challenges is the hard part. And I always really want to give parents the forum to be able to discuss that. So what do I hear from families? And I don't know if this will apply to anybody out there listening, but I find that the biggest obstacles for families, for parents specifically, is sometimes their own backstory, those little subtle bits of guilt and shame and sometimes anger and blame reflect something from their own past that maybe even subtly or without realizing it, they kind of bring to the forefront of their parenting. And one of the things I always like to parents about is helping them find ways that, they can kind of reflect on those, acknowledge them, own them, and sometimes own them proudly, because those can be good motivators for your parenting. But of course, how to use as potent and efficient tools that truly benefit, as opposed to just passing on, some of the same baggage to them. And so I think a lot of that, and I think this applies double during the time of coronavirus, is how parents take care of themselves. We hear a lot about the superheroes out there right now. There are, in pediatrics, lucky, we're blessed, we have it pretty easy. ER physician, amazing people on the front lines in infectious disease, and of course nurses. They are the most amazing group of people, and so I think the thing is that parents need to acknowledge that they are superheroes too, and especially they're superheroes to their kids. And you can find a lot of superheroes out in the world, but really it starts in your own house for what parents are doing every day. I think part of the secret to success, though, is sometimes for parents really being, I hate to call it selfish, but I think acknowledging their emotional needs. And so I encourage all parents listening, take some time out for yourself and don't feel guilty about it. Don't feel badly about it, because what you're doing is when you give something to yourself that's an emotional gift, is that you are actually then going to pay it forward to your kids, because you'll help get rid of some of those, anxieties and find a little bit of stress relief and find ways to be more patient, relax a little bit more, and be a little bit more fun with your child, and opportunities to learn with them. And those are great things, but it starts with finding ways to indulge yourself a little bit, make sure you're, doing whatever works for you. If it's exercising, I think for a lot of families I work with, it's taking 10 minutes a day to journal. Some of the most content that I know of do a little bit of journaling. Probably another big group does a little bit of yoga every day, and for everybody's going to be a little bit different, but indulge yourself, especially right now, especially with everybody in isolation. Those things are really important. Next slide, Lori, whenever you are. All right. Does anybody know what that is? All right. I see a small hand. Nope. All right. That is what's called the world's most expensive puddle. This is a bottle, or at least a facsimile of it, a bottle of wine from Thomas Jefferson's collection. It's a 1787 Chateau Margaux, and it was acquired by a wine merchant named William Sokolin, and in 1989 he was offering to sell it for $500,000, $519,000. And while he was showing it around a room of prospective buyers, he knocked it against a table ever so slightly and broke it. And $500,000 of wine poured out of the bottom of that bottle onto the floor, the world's most expensive puddle. When did that happen? You guessed it, this day in history. So April 23rd. Oh, and as a side note, Hemingway was after the Chateau Margaux. They must have really loved their wine. What do I love about this, especially this day in history? It is a great reminder it's okay to make mistakes. We don't all make $500,000 mistakes, but that's the beauty of it. You can keep things in perspective. Is that, when you make a big mistake, you're like, well, at least it wasn't a $500,000 mistake, And so what's the importance here? As parents, this is a great time to encourage our kids and remind them and remind ourselves we're going to make mistakes. As parents, they should be allowed to make them as kids, and especially since we're all sort of cooped up together, probably going to be seeing how you're doing the same there. And so the goal is, what's the importance of mistakes is that you hear everybody learn from your mistakes and how important that is. But really, what's the ultimate goal? I think the ultimate goal is that we're creating kids who feel empowered in life. And because, really, when you think about what you want to be, you want them to be, stable and emotionally healthy and, successful for all variety of reasons and, all variety of ways. It starts with empowerment, with kids growing up to feel empowered. The most common thing I hear from families is they want their kids to grow up to be really independent. And I think independence is terrific and it's important, but I think when you feel empowered, then the independence, really is a natural byproduct of that. And so I think making that the mantra for I think a lot of families really is something pretty powerful, because kids who feel empowered really know how to be creative in their problem solving and feel that they have the right to solve problems, and they're not just a victim of problems, but they tend to be a little bit happier and a bit more capable of dealing with emotional challenges, because when you feel empowered, you feel like you can take things on. You grow up to be fierce in the best possible way, not cocky, but fearless, because you're willing to take those big chances in life that can really have great successes, and you feel like, that you're entitled in the best possible way to a bright and successful future, and that's a great thing. One last thing. It reminds me, I just got to say, my favorite quote of all time is Eleanor Roosevelt's quote. A woman is like a tea bag. You can't tell how strong she is until you put her in hot water. And that goes for all the moms I know of in my practice, because let's not kid anybody, moms typically are the ones taking it on the chin. And my gosh, are they strong and powerful. And, but I want to give fair credit to dads well, because everybody is kind of contributing a little bit more, during this time of coronavirus. And, and we're all in a little bit of hot water right now, but hopefully it just brings out the strength that we all have and how to model that for our kids. Then last but not least, I think I'm ready for the last slide, and then we can take some questions. Okay. I wouldn't expect anybody to know what this is. It's kind of a unique thing. This is a picture of the Conch Republic. And this is a micronation declared on this day in Key West, Florida, when Key West decided to humorously secede from the rest of the country. And April 23rd, 1982. And the boundaries go from the ocean up to a bar called Skeeter's Last Chance Saloon in Florida City. And the motto for the Conch Republic is "We seceded where others failed," and their currency is the sand dollar, and their time zone is just listed as summer. So, as we celebrate Conch Emancipation Day, I think, again, it's just a great reminder that with all of the weight of self-isolation, of a pandemic that we don't fully understand and we don't fully yet know the repercussions of, and knowing that our kids are kind of suffering along with us, as a time we're trying to protect them and to guide them, and how vulnerable they must feel right now. That one of the best antidotes for that is twofold. Number one, it's reminding yourself to have fun and have fun with your kids, and no better way to kind of blow off steam in a world that seems kind of a little bit heavy right now than finding different ways of having fun and different ways of expression. Let's not kid anybody, communication is hard. Communication, effective and true communication, is hard for adults, because adults oftentimes don't know the roots of their feelings. And that makes communication really challenging a lot of times. And we can't ask anything more of our kids, because communication is equally challenging for them. Sometimes even more so, because they don't have the vocabulary to express what they're feeling. It's why one of the reasons when we see, young infants, maybe around 9 to 12 months of age, who are getting to that toddler phase and starting to do language acquisition, but they're not quite there yet, and they have a lot of temper tantrums. Studies have found that teaching them sign language can be a really effective way of helping to reduce temper tantrums, because they're finding a different way of communicating that helps decompress their anxieties, and they now can communicate with you and connect with you in a whole new way, even before their language acquisition. So let's say now you've got kids who are talking, but they can't quite express what they're feeling right now. So play and having fun can be such an important part of that. And find different ways you can do, drawing, and one of our favorite ways in our family is to do karaoke night, which has taken a lot of nights now. And everybody can, if you have a phone, you've got a karaoke device. So it's so easy, and kids usually love to sing. They love to express themselves. And sometimes it's a great time to also acquire new skills that maybe your children don't have, or maybe you like to practice with them. Again, things like practice yoga, or cooking something fun, or even cooking dinner for the family, or trying new recipes. I want to give a nod to the importance of art. And here we have this sort of lovely little painting. But the reality is, art is such an important way to communicate. I think about the quote from the late great Carrie Fisher, who said, when you're feeling sad, take your broken heart and turn it into art. And that's just another way of saying something so important, of how art can be such a natural and important expression. And kids are born artists. They're natural performers. They're natural artists. They have a way, an ease about them that's not so self-conscious as adults in finding artistic ways to express themselves. And so really tap into that. I was reading a little bit Stephen Simon the other day, and he talked about how art is the tool you use to make sense of the world when it doesn't make sense at all. And the world doesn't make a lot of sense right now. And so explore art with your kids. It's a natural and important way of expression for them, and maybe even for you. And no ability or talent is acquired. God knows I don't have any, but you just got to dive into it and make the most of it. And then I'll finish up with this, and then I certainly want to be able to take your questions. Probably the most important things to just keep in mind as you go forward. And I think a lot of parents that I talk to in the office are already doing this, and this also may be true of everybody out there. So really just an opportunity to double down on what you're already doing. And that's, I think the two healthiest tools you can sometimes use are, number one, finding ways every day to express gratitude and teaching your kids gratitude. Because a lot of psychological studies have shown that one of the best antidotes to feeling sad or scared or angry or depressed is finding the gratitude for the blessings in your life, and sometimes you got to search harder for them. But looking around you and finding ways, that you can do that and find those blessings every day, and knowing how they change a little bit every day, how the fundamentals are still the same. Number two, as I wrap up, is being very cautious with media exposure with your kids. As I tell my parents, I get a lot of families who tell me about what they're hearing in the news and how their kids react to the news, and I say the same thing to them about this that I do when they tell me they've done a Google search for a rash their child had, but they then diagnosed their child with fatal illness. Is that labeling your rash should be about the same thing as listening to the news anymore, and that it should be considered for entertainment purposes only, as far as adults are concerned. But because sometimes you can have a basic message which gets amplified in scary ways, and kids, adults barely have a filter for this, because we know adults get very, very anxious reading the news any time of year, especially now, and kids even more so. Again, because they're not quite sure how to process those feelings of fear that sometimes accompany, almost always accompany, the regular headlines, which are designed to be dramatic and amplified and get you to tune in for more. And so, be mindful of shielding your kids. Definitely if they're under age 7 or 8, I recommend no media exposure, no news exposure, if at all possible. It should all filter through parents. But I definitely, after age 7 or 8, make sure that you take time, if they're exposed to the news, to discuss things with them, and so that you can consume it together, and they have a forum to be able to discuss with you, things that are on their mind. And then last but not least, whenever anybody's feeling down or a little bit, or depressed, is just, again, trying to make that important comparison. My dad always had a phrase. He said, and so, on the days that it seems a little bit like this is never going to end and things can be really kind of a little bit on the darker side, kind of ties into that point about finding the blessing in gratitude, is that, it's important to be able to keep your life in comparison, and you've got so much, starting with your health and working outwards, all the things that probably make any family that's listening, and most families, so much luckier to, compared to so many other families out there in the world who are experiencing, you can always find somebody who's experiencing more hardship, and hopefully that always helps keep the perspective on, looking on the brighter side, and keeping that sort of, more optimistic vision of the days ahead. I think that's a couple in a nutshell. We're about halfway through, and so that's probably a good breaking point. If anybody has any questions, I certainly want to be available to answer those. And if nobody has any questions, I can always talk about a few other things.
Michael, thank you.
Yeah.
I have, my youngest is 18, and I took a full page of notes. So very, very just helpful, thought-provoking. The make sense of the world doesn't really make sense right now is something that we're all feeling. And I applaud all of the parents that took a few minutes to get on this call. I'd like to recommend you can either unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you want to go into the chat bar on the bottom and type in a question, then I'll be happy to read it out loud. One thing I heard on another that I was on is parents splitting up so that they do take care of themselves. Like one parent take a walk and then another parent take a walk, because I think what I've loved for these days is seeing families out walking, and things my neighborhood wouldn't see. Everybody was in their cars running to this or whatever it was. And now I see a lot more families spending time, but to take time for yourself, which is what you were saying, we all have to do that now to continue to get through this. Does anyone have a question? Does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question?
Danny did. She raised her hand in the chat bar, so I'll unmute.
Hey, Dr. Cohen. I was wondering in regards to routine, right? Like we all try so hard to keep our kids on a regular schedule and routine, because most kids really thrive on that. And I think most of us can agree that right now that's gone completely out the window. I know at least in our house, it's taken us this whole month to kind of find what normal is. And even then, that's not set to a clock. How do we kind of navigate that? Is that okay? Is the lack of routine totally fine? Is that something we should be focusing on? I've got no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah. You know what? I will tell you what, Danny, it's a great question. And I'm going to confess something really important to you. Karen and I, we're learning too. So I think we're all making this up as we go along. I think probably several of you out there know Don Nog, and some of you may have received this. He sends a bunch of humorous emails, and he sent one the other day that I just love, and it kind of applies to your question. He has this, so it's titled, "In case you're wondering or need clarification on the latest coronavirus guidelines, here they are." And number one, basically you cannot leave the house for any reason, but if you have to leave the house, then you can. Masks are useless, according to the CDC and the Surgeon General, until they're not useless anymore, and then now maybe they are mandatory as well. And he goes on with all of these crazy contradictions, which is don't do anything unless you have to do it, but then go ahead and do it, okay. And it was so beautiful because, as the power of humor oftentimes has, there's a list of 12 of them here, and each one kind of funnier than last. And I thought, oh my gosh, it made me laugh so hard because it really, I think, embodies so much of what you're asking and what we're all dealing with, is that we're living in a world of contradictions right now, and especially how that applies to parenting. Experts will tell you all the time how important routine is, how important scheduling is. Why? Well, we can tell you all the academic answers there, because it creates safety, it creates structure, it creates routine, it helps with focus, it helps nurture our kids. But at the same time, I will tell you what, you could drive yourself crazy trying to keep an absolute rigid routine during the time of coronavirus. I think the best answer I can give you, and to be honest, we're going to know a lot more in the rear mirror than we do through the windshield. We're all driving through this foggy highway together, and once we get past it and look in the rearview mirror, we'll understand a lot more of a lot of different details, including questions like yours about what's the best way to parent. I think the best answer I can give you right now, however, is just trying to find a hybrid. I think if you can keep a portion of the day that is relatively well scheduled, whether that be for classroom work, because presumably a lot of kids are still doing Zoom learning, so you have to have some structure involved with that. We're certainly recommending that you have a kind of dedicated mock schoolroom area of your house. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to look like a schoolroom, but it should be kind of a dedicated place that's designed for either study or classroom work. And so you already have kind of the routine of your expectation for Zoom learning. But in addition, that there probably is some benefit to still try to instill at least some modest structure as far as things like chores, that you still have an obligation as a team member of the family, and that you're still responsible for chores. And we know that the value in doing at least very basic chores on a regular basis for kids, because as much as they, bristle against them, that it helps them over time. We realize in a number of studies feel that they are, they're really an important part of the team and family, that they have responsibilities that, they're being counted on to perform, and that, and that it develops a kind of a little bit of a work ethic. And it doesn't have to be draconian, but still having some kind of structure in that way. And of course, still trying to find some structure and even scheduling in not scheduling. And what do I mean by that? That you have a scheduled period of time where we're not going to schedule anything, and they can have a timeout for the kids and a timeout for the parents. And everybody gets a little bit of a chance to get some space, in close quarters. And then of course, my personal favorite, if you can get away with it, if you're so inclined with your kids, have a little time every day for reading. Because I think one of the things, I'm not entirely opposed to time, and I can certainly appreciate what an important tool it can be for so many families right now. But I find two things with some of the families that I'm working with. Number one is that screen time in many families is sort of taking over the household. And for a lot of families outside of their Zoom learning, that's all they're doing is screen time. And so it tends to be a little bit excessive. And the other, and I find this paradoxical, is how I find a lot of kids in my practice getting less sleep in the time of coronavirus, in the time of self-isolation, because without structure, now bedtime has sort of gone awry, and so now they're staying up later, again, watching things on Netflix or TV or doing this, that, or the other. And so I think if you just stick with to the best of your ability, and let's not care about doing just the best we can, and definitely allow yourself to, again, learn as you go. You're going to make mistakes. We all are. And that, you'll adjust day by day, and you'll learn a little bit more every day about what works for you and what methods work best for you. But I think if you had to do the basics, that would be the basics of keeping a regular bedtime, because if you had to pick one fundamental thing for kids' mental and physical health, it would be what we call sleep hygiene. Good quality sleep every single night. And you can never force anybody to sleep, but you can certainly do everything in your power to create the environment for healthy sleep, including, if you're going to do any routine at all, it would be a bedtime routine at a kind of set time each night. And if you have a particular routine that you use to get ready for bed, so that you can have the healthiest sleep possible. And then for most kids, it turns into this sort of, pay it forward, where then you get better results the next day and having them work with you on things you want to accomplish. It's never going to be perfect, but I think you just pick your battles. And if you can pick a handful of times through the day that you can keep a little bit scheduled, and then if you have the flexibility to not schedule the rest of it, that's okay too. You're finding a happy medium that hopefully is going to work out well for you in the long run.
It looks like we have another question coming in through the chat. According to our teens, we are the only parents who are taking social distancing seriously and not allowing them to hang out with friends and see their significant others. They seem to understand it now, but their friends do not. Any tips on how they can help talk with their friends about the social distancing?
Yeah. So that's an extremely tough one. I'm going to use my another analogy, which is car safety. Sadly and tragically, in the pediatric population, outside of the first year of life, where the number one cause of death are congenital ailments and illnesses that children are born with. Side of that, typically the number one cause of death for kids is car safety, car accidents. And of course, in many of those cases, those cases are completely preventable. We have certain things we try to instill for families, which is, in my observations, probably the single most ignored rule in all of pediatrics, and that's to keep kids in the back seat till 13 years of age. Statistically, that if you're going to do one thing to save your child's life, it would be to keep them in the back seat of the car until they're a teenager. Just because of the hazards of riding in the front seat of the car. As you can imagine, much like your question about coronavirus, the most common we deal with in pediatrics is none of my other friends are sitting in the back seat. They started sitting in the front seat when they were 8 and 9 and 10, and the parents allow it, and the kids feel very grown up, and only babies sit in the back seat, and it has a real stigma, associated with it. So what do you do with the stigma? What do you do with something that is right, but social pressures are causing you, the sort of peer pressure to do something else, something that's sort of counter to what we know to be in your best interest. And I guess the best way to do that is there's no great way, because teenagers become very independent, they, and a little bit rebellious, and that's part of their nature. And especially when they see their friends doing something and they feel that personal stigma. And of course, the teenagers in general usually try to find blame, and parents are a great source. And parents don't like to be blamed, and they don't like to feel like they're the source of their child's unhappiness. And that's the life of a teenager right there in many cases. So what do you do? I think the first is, to maybe create analogies, which is, where's the data? And again, a lot of teenagers are only going to hear the message they hear from their kids. They're not going to hear a message from you. But you got to do your best, and at least give yourself the peace of mind that you did the best to communicate why you're making the decisions you make. The car analogy is my personal favorite, because the data is in. We know kids survive car crashes in back seats more than they survive them in front seats. And we know that social distancing helps to save lives in ways that congregating socially helps to expend lives. I read something about somebody put together a meme for a dating website, and it said, I love people, I love crowds, I love to get together with folks at a party, and the dating meme was signed by coronavirus. And so that's the dating profile of coronavirus. It loves you. It loves to get together with you. It loves to get together with your friends. And the more you get together with your friends, the more it loves to party. And the reality is we all have a kind of a social obligation. I think maybe the other thing that's different than the car analogy is that where the car analogy is you're saving yourself. But with the social distancing, you really can kind of tap into how your child can be a superhero. You know, we talk about doctors and nurses and even parents and everybody else being a superhero, but your child has an opportunity to be that superhero, maybe even the biggest superhero. You know, if you never expected that one person can make a difference in the world, look at the first human being who had coronavirus, presumably back in September, October. They're still trying to figure out. That one person with coronavirus has now gone on to really shape the world as we know it now. Well, your child in their own way can be the positive antithesis of that, the positive influence of not spreading coronavirus. And if they don't spread it to one person, how many people will they then not spread it to, who then will be saved as a result? So this is their chance to really feel like they're doing something important for the world, to feel, again, empowered that as hard as this is, and worthwhile things are tough. Worthwhile things sacrifice. Worthwhile things do not come easily, and social distancing is very, very hard for teenagers, but to help them get that perspective that they are helping to save the world in their own special way, and they should applaud themselves and be proud of themselves for being that kind of superhero and making that sacrifice, and for parents to acknowledge, you know, the pain they're going through by making that sacrifice, but also applaud them for it. And then maybe finding other ways that, you know, the more that we always encourage in pediatrics that you positive ways to reward your children, as opposed to doing, you know, much less of punishments and much less of the, you know, yelling at them, upset or irritated with them, and much more of the positive influence of acknowledging and or influencing the behavior you like to see more of. If they're willing to do a little bit of social distancing, maybe they get rewarded with, you know, a few more privileges in some other way, or the guarantee of more privileges later on, you know, when social distancing opens up, because they've proven then that they're responsible enough and mature enough for more privileges. And so sometimes you can use that as a little bit of a carrot and a kind of a reinforcement to help instill and reinforce that good behavior you'd like to see, that helps kind of blunt some of the peer pressure, you know, and the social pressures of what's going on out there. And you're exactly right. There's a lot of social pressure to congregate, to engage, to not isolate, that there's, again, that's unfortunately for us as physicians, see the stigma associated with folks who do decide to self-isolate. And despite the data and how important that is. So I think for parents, keep your eyes on the prize and know that you're doing the right thing, no matter how tough it is. Someday, I promise, your kids will realize you made the right decision, especially when they get to be parents. That's usually when it pays off.
Do we have any other questions?
One thing that Dr.
Lori, you cut out.
Jamie, are you still with me?
I'm still here. I'm not sure what happened to Lori. I believe I'm still here.
Did we freeze up?
I can hear you. Okay.
Yeah, we're still here. Okay. One thing that I know that the parent who asked this question is modeling it ourselves. And I know that you're doing a great job of that. And that's the other thing that's as adults and as kids is modeling it at home. And I had a visual, but I don't know how to share it on my screen. Are there any other questions?
You know what, Lori, I just got to say one other thing, because of anything I've talked about, your comment, honest to God, was probably the most important one of the morning, because, you know, this is a challenge and also an opportunity for all of us as parents to understand that, you know, most of what we say to our kids, they will unfortunately not, you know, you can imbue all sorts of wisdom, and you can lecture them, and you can guide them, and you can give them all sorts of verbal praise. You know, you can do anything you want verbally, but it's probably not going to stick that much. But how you act, how you conduct yourself, those are the things that we know stick with kids the most. How you role model in your own behaviors, those are the things that really plant the deepest seeds in the garden you're trying to grow with your kids. And absolutely always being mindful of being the role model you can be. Allow yourself to make mistakes and acknowledge those, and that's okay. But also, you know, always reminding yourself, what are the qualities in your role models, you know, that mean something to you. Your best to embody those, to know that you'll be passing that role modeling on to your kids. And because if you ever say, do as I tell you to, but then you do something differently, forget about it. You might sleep well at night, but you're probably not going to get the effects you're looking for. So I think that's a really important comment.
Great. I just want to thank everybody that joined us today.
It sounded like there was another person trying to chime in.
Lori, it's Danielle Gordman. Can I ask one more question?
Hi, Danielle.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. You are amazing. I just texted you how reassuring it is to listen to you in such a crazy, crazy time. I'm going to go there, and I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you think our kids are going back to school in the fall?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I will tell you what we're dealing with professionally in the office is the same thing that every family is dealing with personally, which are so many variables right now that are unknown. I'll tell you some of the things, I'll reveal sort of behind the curtain, behind the scenes, what we're dealing with on a daily and weekly basis in our office, questions that we're anxious to answer and have no way of doing it. When is an effective test going to come around? There is some testing available. It's not always effective. And we know in kids, there's the potential that the false negative testing rate may be higher than the adult population, which creates an especially significant challenge for us. When will antibody testing be available? And then that segues completely into your question about when is school going to go back, when is social distancing, and of course the biggest is this virus going to mutate into a 2.0 that's going to have some repercussions in the and beyond, and is there going to be a vaccine that's really effective? And no matter what you read about in the news, vaccine being around the corner, I would encourage you to keep your expectations low that you're going to see it in anything less than 9 to 12 months, because you know, vaccines just don't work that way. You just can't rush them. They take their own time. There's the laws of science, and so you know, all of that kind of has to do with when can we go back to school, because school is going to be a big petri dish. It always has been, schools and daycares, and they will continue to be that. I spoke with my sister insight into the school district than I do. They're having those now as what a start date for school might be in the fall, and are they going to start with Zoom learning, you know, or go back? And so I have no good way of answering your question other than to say I know it's being discussed, and I think the summer is going to tell us a lot, and I think the situation is going to be very fluid and very dynamic, and I only pray that our politicians and leaders really use excellent clinical and scientific judgment in the decisions they make as they guide us through this.
Any other questions? Clearly you have a fan club out there, and I just really want to thank you for taking time for us this morning. Depending on what happens with this and when our lives can go back to normal, we may come back to you in a month and say, okay, can we 2.0 with you? Because I think there's just a lot of wisdom that you shared with us today, and thank you. And this has been recorded, so if you know anybody who wasn't to listen, please share that with them. I think we'll be posting it on Facebook.
Probably the YouTube page.
Okay. So thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the beautiful day.
And
And-
additionally, you're going to have a poll that I'm launching right now. We'd love your feedback and thoughts so that we can continue to improve this offering as we move forward.
And
So-
Lori, I just want to say thank you very much for creating this forum. And to anybody listening, please feel free to call me anytime. It doesn't matter if I'm your pediatrician or not. I always want to be a resource to the community, and I welcome everybody to reach out to me anytime they have a question.
Wow. Thank you so much. Everybody just take 1 minute, answer questions for us. And then Jamie, want to tell everybody about next week's Nourishing Your Soul?
Yeah, I would love to. So next week on Nourishing Our Soul, I'm going to pause my screen sharing. Next week on Nourishing Your Soul, we're going to have Carmela Kramer, who's going to be speaking about Jewish meditation, specifically looking at the counting of the Omer, which is the days between Passover and Shavuot, which each kind of have a spiritual element tied to it, so that between the exodus from Egypt and the receiving of the Torah, we do some internal work for ourselves to strengthen ourselves to reach a point where we're ready to gain the wisdom that comes from the Torah. I don't think she's going to be that deeply Jewish, but the kind of spiritual and meditative sides that are combined to it are incredibly meaningful. So we hope you'll be able to join us. It's next Tuesday at 10 a.m.
Great. Thank you so much. Everybody answer the quick survey, and we'll see you next Tuesday. We chose Thursday to work around our schedule, but typically these are Tuesdays at 10 o'clock. And then 2 weeks, we'll have Marty Poulos talking about mental health in the pandemic. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. See you, everybody.
Thank you.
Jamie,
Yeah.
I just wanted, I texted you, the link on the Jewish Omaha page did not work for me.
Okay. I will confirm with Margie and figure out the story behind that.
Yeah, it just went to Ryan Ehrlich. It said it was, he set it up and I was in a waiting room for him. Isn't that weird?
Well, it's probably Robbie. Somehow,
Oh, Robbie, yeah.
One of the Bethel Zoom links made its way into ours.
That's what was on Jewish Omaha.
Okay,
Just so you
thanks
know.
for letting me know. I
Yeah.
will check that.
Awesome. This was amazing.
You are amazing.
Oh. Thank you. No, just kidding. I did text you also if you
Perfect. My
ever.
phone was away. It was over
Yeah.
on the couch, and I decided not to sit on
Totally.
my couch.
Yeah, I got it. Well, I took Lori's advice and I put my Mark Kirchhoff picture up.
Yeah,
So,
it looks phenomenal.
well, that's all Mark for you. All right, I'm gonna go be a mommy now.
All right, have fun. Thank you for joining us. And Liz, if you can hear me, thank you for joining us. And we will see you hopefully next week.
Great. Thanks, Jamie.
Bye. Thanks.